My name is Jeremy Selan. I'm a developer at Valve. I've been working on virtual technology there for a few years now. And at Valve, we've been experimenting with VR for quite a while. Back in 2013, we put together this demonstration of VR technology, which really was the first time many of the modern components of 2016 VR technology was put together. So it was a low persistence HMD, low latency tracking system, high precision, sub-millimeter accuracy. And while this was a very valuable experiment, it really isn't practical for home installation, right? You see this tracks based on a camera on the HMD looking at these markers, and only the most dedicated users were going to do something like this. So we did a lot more experimentation. This was another HMD we put together. This used an IR camera on the right, and it had a series of IR illuminators around it. It would bounce off these retro-reflective markers, and it was a wonderful tracking system. And the best part was we could deploy it at people's desks, right? This didn't require you to do ridiculous stuff to a room. But the challenge was the tracking volume was a little bit limited. People just really missed what they had gotten used to with the previous marker room. So we kept working. We kept doing a lot of experiments with regards to tracking technology. And we came up with what we're calling the Lighthouse tracking system. Who here have heard of this? Is this? Okay, excellent. So I don't have to do the full explanation. But there's a bunch of lasers on the image on the right. You can see an infrared view of one of our test patterns that comes out of the base stations. But these lasers, base stations, you install in the corners of the room, and it allows full tracking over the full volume of that space from 360 degrees, roughly about up to 5 meters max distance from each base station. And now the idea for Lighthouse had actually been around for some time prior to the implementation. But after experimenting with all these forms of tracking, we were increasingly excited about this type of approach. And all of this development effort culminated in our partnership with HTC and the Vive headset. And please note that for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to refer to the Vive a lot. That's only because it's what we have the most experience with currently, and that my hope is that a lot of these ideas and takeaways are broadly applicable to the rest of VR. So, this talk is about experimentation. Why even talk about experimentation? Well, VR breaks developer intuition like almost nothing else I've seen. From what types of experiences are fun, to how to think about locomotion, right? You even have to rethink locomotion in games to work in VR. Even the choice of rendering algorithms. You might spend what historically had been a lot of perf on a certain topic, and all of a sudden in VR, that doesn't matter. Or there's lots of little nuances, say for example, with regards to specular rendering, where all of a sudden in VR it becomes absolutely critical. Anti-aliasing fidelity is another example. The list just goes on and on for things that aren't intuitive. We've seen super smart people in this space just be totally wrong in their guesses. So experimentation is absolutely critical. So knowing that, what can you do about it? Well, the big lesson I think to take away is that target fixation in VR can be killer. Or I should say premature target fixation. So we've seen so many projects where small teams have come and shown us their idea, and they've essentially taken their first idea and run all the way to completion with it. I'll play a demo for 20 minutes, and no offense, like they're often a little bit boring ideas, but say 95% of the way through their demo or their experience, there'll be one little throwaway idea tangential to the experience, and it'll be so much fun, and we'll just do that over and over, right? That should be the game. That's what you should do. And this is an old lesson, right? This comes up all the time. You have to play test. You want to try to find what's interesting. But it happens so often in VR because it's such a new area that people don't know how to interpret the space. And this issue isn't unique to content development. We see it in software, in technology software, right? Trying to figure out what's appropriate to put your investment energy into. And we also even see it in the hardware space, where people might be doing a big project, but one little essence of it is the really exciting bit, and they don't realize it. And you also have to remember the bar for VR is moving incredibly fast. Every generation of VR that comes out that you can think of, that really is the best VR that's ever existed for consumers. And you have to keep this in mind when interpreting user reactions, right? You really want to separate people's excitement for the technology as a whole and just their experience from their reactions to your work. So, once again, this is an old rule in user testing, but don't listen to what users say. Watch what they do, right? I love this expression. This is an honest expression we see all the time when giving demos. So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to focus on examples of things in VR that have broken our intuitions and surprised us, right? We get surprised as much as anybody. So first off, we've done experimentation with interactions. When we first started working on the Vive, we knew controllers was going to be important. but we didn't appreciate the huge degree that they would come to define the experience. Up to date, this was probably one of our most interesting controller experiments. This is a former generation Steam controller with one of the tracking hats on it, tracking with our IR technology. And this was exciting, it was fun, but it wasn't like, it didn't take your breath away, right? We did reactions and people loved it, but they didn't really, really love it, right? No one gasped, no one hugged you. And I will contrast that to the first time we hooked up controller technology in Lighthouse, which was essentially this controller just literally cut in half with Lighthouse tracking on both ends. That's what we showed at GDC. And I'm not sure how many people here have had the opportunity to try this yet, but holding tracked objects in VR is magical, right? You put on the HMD, and you see this controller floating in front of you, which is actually the demoer holding it for you. You reach out and grab it, and what you touch with your hands exactly matches what you see in your virtual headset. And that's it, right? It's a simple experience. If I had described it to you and I was Joe off the street in 1980, you'd be like, sure, whatever. But it really is. It's such a powerful experience, and the depth of that was so unexpected. Back in those days, we were saying, is it important for us to have controllers? How much of a thing does it add? The first time we saw this controller, the first time we tried it, we were like, holy crap, this is the most important thing for us to be working on. This is the core of the product. We have to go this route. In fact, when we first showed the Vive at GDC, our original plan was just to put people in the HMD and jump to the Blue, which is an underwater experience. And what we found was, even though the Blue wasn't really about interactivity and showed the controllers, when people put on the HMD and grabbed the controller, they didn't even watch the demo. They spent the first 30 seconds just sitting there looking at the controller like they had never seen it before, right? Like, honest. So what we had to do was rethink it. We added a whole new sort of demo intro application just to get through that initial shock and that initial experience. This is what it looked like. And the whole point of this was just to get through that 30 seconds of, wow, I have a controller, right? It's an amazing experience that we wouldn't have predicted. We also did experiments with other forms of interaction. Along the same lines of reaching out and touching the real world, this is examples of the chaperone system. So the chaperone system is a platform-level safety feature, and it keeps users from bumping into walls. So this is at home. This represents the actual walls of my play space. And we were really concerned when we added this feature that it would take away from the immersion, right? We were like, holy crap, if we don't want people to get hurt, so we can't turn it off. But at the same time, wouldn't this destroy the view? It turns out the opposite is true. So the key thing we learned was that when you put these boundaries at the real locations in the walls, and in fact we did that at GDC, we asked people to walk forward until the bounds turned on, then reach out and touch where that grid was. As soon as you realize that that grid is the real wall, you feel the physical thing, it sort of changes how you feel about it. Not only did people not care and not think that it broke the immersion, it actually added to the experience because they felt safer and better walking around the regular environment. It actually improved. People were very nervous to walk. As soon as they walked to the walls, touch this, and believe it, the rest of the experience was very different. Then people would just casually jump around. These types of experiences with interaction, there are probably some brilliant people here who would have predicted it, but we didn't. So another thing which I personally underestimated, of course some people on the team were very passionate about it, was haptics. So I had always thought of haptics as sort of just being rumble packs, like just generic rumbling, but it couldn't be further from the truth. So along the same lines of that little introduction we showed at GDC, and all of these demos, by the way, are available for download if you have the developer edition. You could touch the thumb pad, and it would blow up a balloon, and then the balloon would let go, and it would just float in space. And you could take your controller out and tap it. And because of the haptic actuators on the controller, which are the same ones on the regular Steam controller, you feel that thump. And that's it, right? Okay, so you feel a thump. No, it totally changes things, right? The first time I did that, I sat there and just giggled, right? It is so much fun to blow a balloon and thump it. So I use VR every day. I have used what I would describe as high-quality VR every day for multiple years in my office. And the first time I had this application, which was a few weeks before GDC, I spent 30 minutes blowing up balloons. And I'm not even kidding, right? Every developer in our office essentially wasted a day just making a balloon hitting it. And you could walk around, right? People don't know, you can't see when you're in the HMD. So you'd walk through the office and everyone at their desk just... And this is Valve, so we have access to a lot of great games, and these are famous developers, and they're just hitting balloons, right? It's so much fun, right? The everyday, that's also one of the takeaways, is that seemingly everyday normal things are such a joy in VR. Physics engines are the same way, right? Just throwing balls and watch them bounce. We would do that for hours too. Just in Unity, just turn on physics and just let them bounce. It's so much fun. Another example of not underestimating haptics is the bow and arrow introduction. It's a simple bow and arrow thing. We had originally created it, I believe Sawyer created it, where you reach behind you to show the controller, you grab an arrow, pull it out, draw it back, and let go. It was designed to show 360 controller tracking, that you could move your hand back there. But for me, that didn't make the demo. What made the demo is that as you drew the string and pulled it back, you felt the tension of the string. It still blows my mind. I was like, how do you make it feel like tension? Like, I'm a developer, I know there's no string there, but I pull it back and you felt it. And the haptic system, I still actually never even asked him. I'm presuming it was something where it vibrated at a certain frequency, and as you pulled it back, the vibration frequency probably increased. But you interpret that as tension. So as soon as I felt that, I was like, wow. More than almost any other component on the controllers, high fidelity haptics is just such a killer component. All through experimentation, right? So these types of things we're discovering with the ThumbPad, there isn't one trick to do, right? There's hundreds of tricks out there. We're trying to ask all the developers right now with the dev kits to try to learn and discover these things. These types of issues barely scratch the surface of what's possible with this type of technology. Whoop. Another example of something that really surprised us was the power of photoreal environments. So one of our developers, Adam Foster, went to Iceland recently, and instead of taking home photos, as you normally would, and showing them around the office, he would go to a single environment, take, say, 150, 200 photos, and then come back and run it through photogrammetry software. He could reconstruct textured models. So actually, this is someone running through that. He later posted them online. And there was a really nice blog post about how he did this on steamvr.com. If you're interested, you could read up on it. You'll see the person in the lower right-hand corner, that's them in their room, and this is what they're seeing when they're walking around. It's important to note this is not 360 video, right? This is all the full motion parallax. This is everything you'd expect from like a high-resolution, diffuse textured environment. And it's a really, really powerful thing, right? This triggers emotional reactions in people. There's a really nice audio along with this, and when I put this on at home in my living room, it's totally calming, right? Like some core part of me really believes I'm outside in Iceland, and it's really enjoyable. Another example of this is he used the same approach on the images from the Mars Science Lander, the Curiosity rover. So they reconstructed the view walking around the surface of Mars. And last week we actually demoed this publicly at the Museum of Flight in Seattle for Space Fest. And one of the folks we demoed this for was a JPL employee whose real day job is planning the path for this same rover. And that's why they had it. It was Space Fest. All these people came in. But remember, this guy has spent months taking this imagery, and this was the first time he was able to feel like he was really there, and it just blew him away. We were surprised by that, right? Like he really felt like this was the environment he had lived in, but only through the screen, and now he felt like he was there. These types of use cases surprised us, right? This is not a gaming use case. We want people to continually search for new ways of using this data in VR for new applications. This is some of the most exciting parts of VR. And then sort of on the home front, I love optics, I love color, I love light. Light and color itself can be emotional. Even core little bits of technology can provide emotional moments. So current display technology is pretty limited from a dynamic range standpoint. If I put in a traditional HMD a picture of the sky, it doesn't look like the sky. It looks like the picture of the sky, right? If you think about the illumination you would need to actually recreate the sky, it's many, many times what display technology can use. Well, we did some experimentation. I put together a demo in the lab where we drove the displays in some illegal manner that would not be shippable, and the displays probably lasted 2 hours. But we got on many dozens of times increase in illumination. And we put on a beach scene, and you put it on. First off, you giggle, right? I tested probably 10 developers. Every single one of them giggles when you put it on. Because when you put on the beach scene, not only do you feel like you're at the beach, not only does it feel real, you feel the heat from the displays on your skin. right? So you're like, wow, I really am outside at the beach. And they'd get used to it. You'd squint. I won't say how bright it was, but it was fire hazard bright. But everyone laughed. Everyone giggled. And then as they take off the HMD, it looked like some weird commercial with light spilling out all over your face. It was like they had a spotlight shining at their eyes. It was amazing. And then as you take it off, you'd feel depressed, right? Because it's Seattle. It's really dreary. I think it was November. It was really dim. And you're like, oh. And the worst part is every time from then on that you'd ever use a normal headset, and by normal I mean all of the modern generation, you'd just feel really sad and disappointed, right? Because you'd remember it. So there aren't many times in technology where you're like, you put together a demo where you're like, yes, I need that. I don't care what it takes to get there. That's going to be such a valuable feature. This is one of them. So we can't promise anything, but I think it's valuable, and I'd love it if we work towards it. How am I doing on time? Is that time remaining? Uh-oh. Okay. I'll skip some. Equally powerful to some of these positive emotions, I want people to be attuned to some of the negative ones, right? You have to be careful and to watch for some of the negative problems that could happen in VR, because these could make people disengage. And these are all things that have been said before, but I think they're worth repeating. No one should feel motion sick in VR. So people often talk about VR legs or advanced VR experiences like we're really of the strong opinion this shouldn't be a thing. If you think about the number of people who have used VR this year or will use it in the next year, 99% of the people who are going to make VR a huge success haven't used it yet, right? They are the target audience. You can't trust that, oh, to make VR succeed, we have to appeal to a certain market segment next year. No, for VR to really take off in the long term, it has to be accessible to everyone. So as a data point, I personally get immediately sick from 3D games. Like traditional games on a 2D display when they're in 3D get me ill. I can use the Vive every day. I do use the Vive every day with no ill effects, right? This type of experience should be the bar for what we're doing. And I think next year the onus will be on the developers to do that. If developers do their part, I think we'll be able to create experiences that can get us there. This is sort of the corollary, but locomotion in VR requires forethought, right? You can't adopt the traditional desktop approaches. None of this is new. People are familiar with it, but I'm only saying it here because we think it's really important. People are doing a lot of interesting work in the space. So on the right, you see a demo from one of our partners at Cloudhead Games. They've done some really wonderful work on locomotion. And more of this type of experimentation needs to be done, right? Like I implore all of you guys to test every idea you can think of. I think a week or two ago, someone posted online another idea where they take a very small field of view and they translate that, but the vection for the outer area is stable. I haven't tried it yet. That sounds like an awesome idea. Like, people should think of more ideas like that. Good locomotion in VR might feel totally different than what people expect. We need to keep experimenting. Another thing that's sort of common, or that we want to evangelize, is once people go for experiences, either hardware or software, with positional tracking, it's a huge letdown to go back to systems that don't have it. And it isn't surprising, right? The depth cue from motion parallax, from moving your eye, is far more powerful than stereoscopy, right? There's a reason motion tracking is so important. And we understand that there's huge technological limitations that mean some of the capture systems, some of the content can't, for the short term, have a motion or positional tracking. And we understand that some of the most popular VR systems also can't have it yet due to technological limitations. But we think this is an important target. And furthermore, once people get used to it, once the customers get savvy, we think they're not going to be able to take a step back. In the same way the HDR displays might really make you sad to go back to a system without it. Another little thing is that people need floors. Initially at GDC, we didn't realize this, so we had a bunch of experiences. I think even the first version of Tilt Brush didn't have a floor. And probably 75%, 88% of people were fine. And then there were 20% of people where you'd put it on and they'd just be like, oh my God, and they'd lock up. I think my parents were both in that category because I show them all the demos. So it's really important. You need to see down. Just as an anecdote, this is why the Vive doesn't have square displays. They're actually rectangular. They're 1080 by 1200 across. And that extra area is allocated in the down direction vertically. This is because it's so important to see your feet. And this goes doubly so when you're walking around in VR systems. One bonus thing to look out for is fear, right? VR amplifies anything you do. It amplifies emotions. It amplifies storytelling. You really want to be careful. People are sometimes fear of heights, fear of large creatures. The blue, which isn't a scary experience. This thing is coming towards you. We had a bunch of people who were scared of being underwater. That freaked them out. We had a bunch of people who were looking the wrong way when the whale showed up, and they turn around and all of a sudden there's a whale in your face, right? What was not intended to be a scary beat becomes pretty scary. There's a little trick we use for demos, which is beforehand we tell people, if anything makes you scared, if you get nervous, if you don't like what you're seeing, just close your eyes, right? It's surprising. No one thinks of it. Because in real life, right, like years of evolution, if there's something scary happening, closing your eyes is a really bad strategy. In VR, closing your eyes is a great strategy, which is why it's important to tell users before demos they can do this. So VR really is owning your own holodeck, right? The most powerful uses of VR no one's thought of yet. I mean, I keep going back to Tilt Brush. I have a Vive at home, and in real life, when I'm just interested in doing VR, just to mess around at the end of the day, that's what I'll use. I'll go home and play it. This was a wonderful video posted online for the Future of Storytelling conference. This is Glenn Keane, a famous Disney animator, right? And what type of game is Tilt Brush? What is this? Is it a game? Is it experience? I think in Steam, when you go to find it, it's in the software category. But I mean, it sort of breaks boundaries, right? There are so many more of these types of applications out there, and we really want people to keep searching for them and to make them. So that's about it. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? That's a no, but they're being polite. And the question was, any knowledge when more Vive developer kits will be available? I'm not the person to ask. I know that all efforts right now are being geared towards commercial release, so you'd have to talk to HTC.
So I really want to know about the difference between the computation costs. How expensive or different is it between the Lighthouse and the constellation tracking system that similar to Oculus?
Well, I certainly won't speak to Constellation. I think that you'd have to ask that for them. But
well, you were using IR tracking, which is, I guess, would be.
We were, but that was a different IR tracking system with different math behind it. So I know in terms of computation, it's important to think about bandwidth as well. We have to go to great lengths to minimize the bandwidth that we're sending from the wireless controllers back to the HMD. But computationally, these will all be well less than 1 core. I don't think the computational differences between the approaches will be substantive in meaningful ways. I think it will come down to the convenience of installation, the ability to track in large areas or not, the different things of that nature. I can count to 2, so that's it. Thank you.